Scene: a computer screen with a browser window open, displaying a requesting message. Imagine you're sitting at your computer, browsing the web. You type in a website's address, like www.example.com, into your browser's address bar. Scene: the browser sends a request to a web server. When you hit enter, your browser sends a request over the internet to a web server. This is the computer or system that stores the content for the website you're trying to visit. Scene: a simple diagram pops up showing the browser client making a request to the web server. The request is usually made using the HTTP or HTTPS protocol, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or its secure version. The request says something like, "Hey, I want the web page for www.example.com. The web server responds. Scene: the web server receives the request and looks through its files. Once the server receives the request, it checks its file system to find the right file. Typically, this is an HTML file that tells your browser how to display the content on the page. Scene: the server retrieves an HTML file from its directory. If everything is in order, the server grabs the HTML file, along with any related files such as CSS for styling, JavaScript for interactive elements, and images. These files are often stored in a directory on the server, like a public folder. The response: Scene: the web server sends the files back to the browser. The server then responds to the request by sending the requested files back to your browser, using the same HTTP/HTTPS protocol. Scene: the browser receives the response and begins rendering the page. Your browser, now with all the necessary files, begins rendering the web page. It builds the layout, applies styles, and runs any scripts needed for interactivity. Scene: the browser displays the full web page on the screen. And just like that, the website appears on your screen, ready for you to explore. How does a web server work behind the scenes? Scene: a diagram of the web server process, browser HTTP request web server response browser. Let's break it down a bit more. When your browser sends that request, the web server processes it using these basic steps: listening for requests. The web server is always running, waiting for incoming HTTP/HTTPS requests on a specific port, usually port 80 for HTTP and port 443 for HTTPS. Processing the request. Once the server receives the request, it interprets the URL, like www.example.com, to figure out which file or resource you're asking for. If you're requesting a dynamic page, the server might also run a script, like PHP, Python, or Node.js, to generate the content. Sending the response. After the server gathers the necessary files or generates the dynamic content, it sends an HTTP response back to the browser. This response typically includes an HTTP status code, like 200 OK if everything worked or 404 not found if the resource doesn't exist, along with the requested content. Types of web servers. There are different types of web servers that handle these requests, with the most common ones being a popular, open-source web server known for its flexibility and wide usage. Another highly efficient and lightweight server often used for handling high traffic. A web server for Windows servers, typically used in corporate environments. Known for its performance, often used by hosting providers to optimize website loading times. What is the role of a web server in a web application? Scene: a flowchart showing the web server interacting with databases and backend scripts. When you're interacting with a dynamic website or a web application, the web server might not just send static files. It can also interact with other systems, like databases. The web server may retrieve data from a database to display on your web page, such as user information or product listings. Backend scripts. The server might run server-side code, written in languages like Python, PHP, or Ruby, to generate content or process user input. In summary, Scene: a simple animation showing the flow from browser to server and back. A web server acts like a middleman between your browser and the website's content. When you request a web page, the server processes that request, retrieves the necessary files, and sends them back so your browser can render and display the page. It can handle both static content, like HTML and images, and dynamic content, like scripts and data from a database. And that's how a web server helps make the internet work. Key points to remember: a web server listens for requests from clients, usually web browsers. It serves files, HTML, CSS, images, etc., based on those requests. It can also run scripts to generate dynamic content. Common web servers include Apache, Nginx, and EASE. This script provides an overview of how web servers work in a simplified way, which can be very useful if you're explaining the concept to someone new to web technologies.